Here again are the links to the lecture slides. I apologize if the link for lecture 3 is different from the other two. That's because I screwed up the first time I tried to make it, and I couldn't fix my mistake, so I had to get creative. In addition, and this will be back up again in a moment, I've put up just a few online resources. I put the first one, Osiris Net, because yesterday it came up about the tombs, especially the New Kingdom tombs, but other tombs, and how well are they preserved. If you're curious and you want to look at all the tombs you possibly can, you can go to that website, and it's got more information than you might ever want for individual tombs. Not just of the New Kingdom, but of various periods of Egyptian history, and it's quite useful, although almost too much information. Another kind of generally good, reliable website for Egyptian stuff generally is the University of College London's website. Again, if you're writing this down and the addresses are, you don't want to write them down, you can just Google UCL for University College London, UCL Egypt, it'll be one of the top hits. They have a whole bunch of different pages about different aspects of ancient Egypt, and it's pitched for a general audience and quite reliable. Because as you may have noticed, there's a lot of variability on the internet in terms of quality of things, but this is a reliable site. And then, especially for those of you who already have some backgrounds in ancient Egypt and have done reading and so forth, but even those of you who are new, I would encourage you to check out the, I should have actually put the name of it there, the University of California's, it's the UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles, Encyclopedia of Egyptology. That's what the UEE stands for. And it's open access scholarly articles that are fairly short, although they get sometimes technical, on all kinds of different topics of ancient Egyptian history and civilization. So if you have done a lot of kind of introductory reading and you really want to get into more, but you don't know what to do, and you don't want to buy books, that might be a good place to go. And again, it's the UCLA Encyclopedia Egyptology. See, some people are still writing, so I won't change the slide yet. And then there's also, in the next slide, I'm going to recommend 3 books specifically on mythology and the gods that might, that I think are really, are good, again, for people who are new to the subject. So on the left is Richard Wilkinson's Complete Gods and Goddesses of Ancient Egypt. It's very visual, lots and lots of pictures, and it starts out with essays on different topics of religion, and then it has kind of like a dictionary almost of different deities, with lots of pictures. It's a remarkably affordable book. There's no ebook as far as I know, but it sells I looked on Amazon today, and it sells for about $18 US. And shipping to South Africa is only $10 US. So, and if you haven't bought stuff from Amazon to South Africa before, it works quite well. Let me assure you, as an American living in South Africa, if you use their global service, it's quite fast and efficient. And sorry, I just realized I misspelled his name when I wrote it. It's Wilkinson. Then there's 2 other books by Geraldine Pinch. This one is quite short, and as it says, a very short introduction. You can also get it as an ebook. And it's quite good. This one is a bit longer, Egyptian mythology, a guide to the gods, goddesses, and so on. It also begins with a series of essays, kind of a narrative of sources and the main mythological traditions, and then it also has kind of like a dictionary in the back with entries for all kinds of different gods and goddesses, and it's really good for reference. So these are kind of the 3 I would recommend starting out with. Okay, so today, the mythic cycle of Osiris. So the god Osiris, he was a king on earth. He's God, but he was king on earth. He's killed by his brother, partially resurrected by his sister, and eventually avenged and succeeded by his son. No other myth or mythic cycle is as intimately woven into the cultural life of ancient Egypt as the Osiris cycle. And it has great allegorical resonance for Egyptian society. For kingship, the deceased king identifies with Osiris, and he's followed by his legitimate heir, Horus, as a successor. But there's also resonance for everyday Egyptians, life after death, immortality after magical resurrection. These themes have universal appeal, of course. So let's get into it. First is to review a little bit of what we've done the past 2 days. So the Ennead, this group of gods is at the core of certain creation myth traditions, especially the Heliopolitan tradition. The creator god in this tradition, Atum, emerges. He gives birth first to Shu and Tefnut, the atmosphere, who in turn give birth to Geb and Nut, the earth and sky. And they in turn give birth to 2 pairs of gods, Isis and Osiris, Seth and Nephthys. And I should have changed the order. Osiris is the eldest, if anyone is concerned. So Osiris and Isis represent harmony and fertility. Seth and Nephthys originally represent conflict, chaos, infertility, but there's a twist, as we'll see later on. Nephthys kind of changes sides. We'll come back to that. And of course, during the process of creation, the creator god creates much more than just these group of gods. He creates the world, all kinds of other gods, humans, and so forth. And in the process, he transforms into the sun. And the sun is thus a manifestation of the creator's power in the world, a visible manifestation that we can all see. And so, in the beginning, the sun god rules over everything. But then, as we saw yesterday, he becomes weary of mankind and all their shenanigans, their evil, and he withdraws, separating what his creation into earth and a kind of vaguely defined, other world, beyond. And then he leaves things in the hands of others. Now, different traditions present the divine sex succession differently, but often he's followed by Geb as the earth, right? So it makes a certain amount of sense. As we saw yesterday, one of the texts we looked at yesterday, the responsibilities were kind of split between Geb and Thoth. But in all of these traditions, more or less, there are cosmic struggles again. There's chaos. Geb or whoever has to try and fight this and maintain the divine order. And eventually, Geb abdicates to his son, his eldest son, Osiris. So what about Osiris? Who is Osiris? He's one of the most important gods in Egyptian religion and mythology. He, along with Ra and Horus, they appear most often in the early texts, in the pyramid texts. And he's important for kingship ideology, as I mentioned already, but he's also important, he's very popular as well, as a god of death, fertility, and resurrection. His origins are rather obscure. It seems he probably originated, again, in some particular locality in Egypt, as a fertility god associated with the earth. But by the end of the Old Kingdom, but probably earlier, but we can document it for sure by the end of the Old Kingdom, around Dynasty 5, we know the kings regarded themselves as a form of Osiris after their death. And his cult at this point has become widely prominent and documented in several places in Egypt. And he remains a very important god throughout ancient Egyptian history, well until through the Roman period. So it seems that as Osiris rose to popular prominence, he was thus incorporated into the theological framework of the creation, and into the genealogy of the Heliopolitan tradition, and is then made the eldest child of Geb and Nut, and then one of the rulers after Ra abdicates. And he's typically portrayed as an ideal ruler, a good and just ruler, and he rules side by side his sister consort Isis. There's not a lot of details, not any real stories from his reign. It's just kind of generally acknowledged that it was good. But this changes, or things go south for Osiris because he's murdered by his brother. And there's several stages to the saga. Seth murders and dismembers him, and takes over the kingship. Isis, together with their sister Nephthys, search for his body and bring it back. And magically revive him long enough for her to conceive their son, Horus. The gods rule his death unjust, and he's permitted to live on as king of the underworld. But that means that Seth is still above, reigning on Earth. And in the meantime, Isis must protect Horus against Seth, because he remains a threat to him. Horus eventually comes of age, and then challenges Seth to claim his birthright. He's eventually triumphant, and thus avenges Osiris by defeating Seth, and takes his place as king and rightful heir to Osiris. That's the general sketch, and we're going to go through those different parts, right, one by one. And so the cycle of Osiris, the myth of Osiris really is a cycle. It's a number of stories within. It's a story about male rivalry in a family. It's a story about a wife and her devotion to her husband. It's a story about a mother and the lengths that she'll go to protect her child. It's a story about a fatherless son trying to reclaim what's his. And of course, it's a story about life after death. And interestingly, for all that we call it the Osiris Cycle, Osiris is actually a pretty passive character in the whole thing, because he dies at the beginning and doesn't have much of a role in the rest. He's omnipresent in the stories, but he's not the one driving it. I don't want to get into a whole bunch of boring details about sources, but I do think it's important to kind of recognize the problem with our sources for the story, because that then explains some of the contradictions and complexities of the tradition. So the sources we have are scattered, they're disparate, they span over 3,000 years. So really, before the time of the Greek writers, there is no narrative explanation of Osiris's death. It's mentioned, it's referenced in all kinds of funerary texts, coffin texts, pyramid texts, funerary books. But we don't get a whole we don't get a true story the way that we like to think of them. What happens is that the Greeks start to do that because the Greeks love narrative. So they start collecting these stories, they talk to Egyptians, they try to figure out what's going on, they are also confused, and they try to make sense of it and write a narrative. But of course, since they're writing it in Greek, and they're writing it for mostly a Greek audience, because Osiris becomes popular outside of Egypt, eventually. The Greek writers kind of put their own spin on it, right? According to more the traditions of Greek mythology. There's a bit more drama, and we'll see some of the differences as we go through. And so the longest and most complete version is written by Plutarch, who was a Greek philosopher and historian living at the time of the Roman Empire. And he wrote a very long book called Isis, about Isis and Osiris. And it's translated, you can buy it also on Amazon and wade your way through it. It's quite interesting. So he gives the most kind of accessible story. And I think, like I said, on Wednesday, if you've read about the myth of Osiris, in a popular book or a retelling of it, you've probably read some version of what Plutarch wrote. Now, there's commonalities between his version and the earlier Egyptian testimony, and we'll look at that in a bit. We also do have some Egyptian literary tales. One in particular is called The Contendings of Horus and Seth. These literary tales more concern Horus and Seth. They don't really concern the death of or murder of Osiris. But these literary tales give different versions of Horus's life and the conflict between him and Seth, and they're quite entertaining and interesting as well. But the important thing is that these different sources span almost 3,000 years. So of course there's variations and changes, and what will seem like to us contradictions at times. Okay, well, let's start with the murder of Osiris. So, as I said, in the Egyptian sources, it's described in really vague terms. And there's a good reason for that. It's because when these things are written, they're written down in the pyramid text, they're carved in stone, or they're carved in coffins. often with illustrations. And there's good reason to not want to carve even a description of the murder of Osiris or a depiction of it, because these writings have power, right? So you don't want to depict or carve or memorialize something terrible. So we assume that's why we don't get good descriptions of it in Egyptian. Presumably, the story of Osiris' murder was passed down orally, and that's where the Greek authors are getting these parts of the story. But we do get certain oblique references, and it seems that Seth attacks Osiris either in the form of a crocodile or a wild bull, somewhere remote, and throws him down, either into a ravine or casts him into the Nile. And then Isis and Nephthys search for him and recover his body. But again, it's never really told in a very clear, straightforward way. Plutarch and others, they give a different version, slightly, and they kind of jazz it up a little bit, perhaps, and make it more detailed. So in the Greek version, at least as told by Plutarch, the assassination happens very publicly. We're told it's the 28th year of Osiris' reign, and Seth and Seth's followers plot against him. And Seth has a beautiful chest made, and he brings it to this party, this feast. And he says, anyone who can fit in this chest, the person who fits in it properly can have it. And so all of these different people try, and they can't do it. And finally, of course, Osiris lays down in it. It's like, yeah, it fits. And Seth shuts it, locks it, and then throws it into the Nile. And it floats into the Mediterranean, and Isis hears about this and starts going into deep mourning and starts searching for the chest. She tracks it down to Lebanon, to Byblos. And where apparently the chest has grown into a huge cedar tree. A beautiful, magnificent tree, which the king of Byblos had cut down and used to make into a magnificent column for his palace. Isis plots for a while just to get it without revealing herself. She's not very successful, so she eventually reveals herself and just demands the column. She's like, you're giving me this now, take it. And within the column, we're told, is the chest in some form. She brings it back to Egypt, but then Seth finds it again. And it's at that point, we're told by Plutarch, that he tears the body up into 14 parts. And different Greek authors give a different number of parts. But we're told by this tradition that Osiris' body is ripped apart and scattered. And Isis searches for each of these body parts and holds a funeral for them. And we're told the reason, the explanation for this, or rather that this dismemberment is an explanation for why there are so many places in Egypt that claim to be the birthplace of Osiris. Because there's lots of temples to Osiris, and naturally, many of them want to claim to be the original. So that's how Plutarch makes that connection. There is a little bit of Egyptian corroboration for at least some of it, but there are references in the old Egyptian sources to a mutilation of the body. And certainly mutilation is a theme of the later conflict between Horus and Seth. So, it's not as if Plutarch is completely making this up. So, and then we're also told that, of course, Isis, so in some versions, Isis buries all the parts. In other versions, she brings them all back together and puts the body back together and tries to hide it from Seth. In Plutarch's version, there's one piece missing, one crucial piece, and that is Osiris' penis, which she has to make a magical one of, because she is still destined to give birth to his child, and that's got to happen somehow. And the Egyptians have, I don't think they do it a little differently. We'll see in a little bit. But as part of this myth, then, Isis and her sister take a prominent role as the ones who mourn and search out Osiris' body and then protect it. And then, as a result of that, that's the role they take in Egyptian funerary rituals as well, where Isis and Nephthys protect the deceased, who ritually takes up the role of Osiris. But wait, the Nephthys was the sister consort of Seth. what happens? Well, there is. So originally, Nephthys seems to be the female counterpart of Seth, and is much like Seth, a kind of destructive feminism, infertile, and so forth. I mean, Seth is destructive masculinity; she is destructive feminism. However, another completely divergent tradition emerges in the Egyptian sources, where Nephthys is the unwilling wife of Seth, and in fact is an ally of Isis and Osiris. And she becomes Isis's close companion and helps her protect and resurrect Osiris, and also helps guard Horus. Why does it develop this way? I'm not sure, but I imagine it has something to do with Egyptian love of morality and symmetry and harmony. It just looks better to have Isis paired with someone, with an ally. And she is represented many times as needing assistance. She's very powerful, but so is Seth. So she needs help. Okay, so here's just a couple more pictures about of the role of Nephthys and Isis in funerary ritual. So here on the top are two ends of a coffin of Tammuz the Fourth, and you can see that you have Nephthys is at the head and Isis is at the foot, and this is very common on elaborately decorated coffins. And then also though in jewelry, amulets, jewelry, necklaces, you get images of Isis and Nephthys on either side of a symbol that represents Osiris. And you can always recognize them because they have their names written on their heads. That's what these little, what these headdresses are. These aren't just headdresses, these are actually the hieroglyphs of their name. So they're easily identified. So Isis throughout the myth is shown as a devoted, unrelentless in her pursuit of Osiris. This is true in both the Egyptian and the Greek versions. And with the help of Nephthys, she recovers the body. But she knows she's destined to give birth to Horus, but she's got to make that happen somehow. So at some point what she does is she has to resurrect the body. Whether she put the body back together or if she did this before the body was cut up, it's different versions. But she's got the body, and there's various versions of how she does this, but one pretty popular version in the Egyptian tradition is that she takes a bird form to breathe a magical breath of life into Osiris' body, and then somehow takes back up some of his life force and becomes impregnated. And we see that a lot in artistic representations. But if you're wondering what's going on in this relief, you've got Osiris' body here, you've got Isis as a bird there, but you've also got Horus, even though he's not born yet, he's going to be born, he's there. And then Isis also in her human form. That's also I think that's part of why Nephthys was recruited, and since it's my own theory, recruited to be Isis's companion, is that it's just too awkward to have Horus be the other one, since he's not born yet. So Nephthys seems like a better choice. The thing is though, although Isis has Osiris' body, she's very, very powerful. And she can resurrect him a bit, she cannot bring him back to life completely. Seth's deed is not undone. As I said earlier, the various gods, the power, the Ennead, the remaining Ennead, and others, they rule that his death is unjust. So as a compromise, they let him live on as the king of the Duat, the realm of the dead, where he will rule over the blessed dead. And so he's confined there, right? His resurrection then is only there, but he becomes a force of regeneration in the cosmos. And that is why then the Osiris myth has a great relevance for Egyptian conceptions of the afterlife. Now, at some point in the evolution of this tradition about Osiris, the myth of Osiris and his body's recovery combine with the cult of another god altogether, Anubis. And Anubis, as a separate deity, he was also connected with the dead, as a protector of the dead and an overseer of funerary rites. And the kind of merging of these two traditions happens such that the Osiris story becomes the origin story for mummification. And this starts first in Egyptian tradition with a deceased king, but then eventually gets extended to all the dead, or certainly anyone who can afford mummification and such rituals. And thus, all aspects of the ideal Egyptian funeral, the wealthiest, best funeral you can pay for, all aspects of it are given mythological precedence. Mummification, entombment, like hiding the body from Seth and from chaotic forces, and then revival in the duat, in the afterlife. And thus Osiris, the fact that Osiris can't come back to the actual world, is a reflection of the fact that the dead can't actually return to our world, but they can live on in this other realm. It makes that reality then more accessible or more understandable. Just a couple more visual examples of the kind of association, the role of Osiris. So I think it's a temple of Karnak. The king is often shown as Osiris, and you can tell because he's all wrapped up, right? Kind of like a mummy. So reference to his continuing life in the underworld. And then also the role of Osiris is as judge of who makes it into the blessed afterlife. That becomes very prominent from the New Kingdom onwards in a series in the funerary texts that accompany, mostly the wealthy. The so-called Book of the Dead, right? So the Book of the Dead, as we dramatically call it, is simply a series of spells for the transfiguration of the soul, for the soul to make it to the afterlife. Utterances, philosophical musings, and so on. And part of the process, part of the journey into the blessed afterlife is that the deceased has to get judged in the tribunal of the gods, and with Osiris overseeing the entire procedure. And you basically have to confess that you lived an upright life. And then they test that by weighing your heart. Believe it or not, this is a heart, not a jar. This is your heart. Against the feather of Ma'at. I should have written it down, but I mentioned Ma'at yesterday, right? Ma'at being this principle of cosmic order. If your heart is lighter than the feather of Ma'at, you are good to go to the afterlife. If it's heavier than the feather, at least according to these practices and traditions, well then you're going to get eaten by this thing, which is a combination hippo, lion, crocodile. All of it. And he looks really eager, right? Very excited. Other gods are there. There's Thoth is waiting to write down the verdicts. Horus then, of course, everyone makes it through, right? In these scrolls. And I should say that each of these scrolls are always personalized, right? So as you're preparing for your funeral, you would get a scroll with your name in it, and you would pick which spells you want to be included, because there's a lot to choose from.
Excuse me, is that hieroglyphs on top of those figures there?
Yes. So this is one example of when they actually wrote hieroglyphics on papyrus. We get them on some of these funerary papyri. Sometimes they write in hieratic, which is a more cursive version, but these are proper hieroglyphs.
And explaining what is depicted there, is it correct?
So these are the names of the gods. Each one here. See, look, there's Nephthys, there's Isis. As for this is what he's saying. This is his confession. Yeah.
And the heads?
Sorry?
Sorry, who are the heads? Which gods are the...
Well, these gods?
No, the ones below.
Oh, so this is Thoth, Horus, Anubis. Sorry, I probably should have labeled these for you guys. Anubis always has the canine head. Thoth, when he's a humanoid, he has the bird head, like in your yard, ibis. If he's a baboon, he's a baboon, right? I don't think I've ever seen him as a man with a baboon head. If he's a man, he has the bird head. If he's a baboon, he's a baboon, entirely. Horus, and then Osiris, and then you can guess maybe who these two goddesses are behind Osiris? Isis and Nephthys, right? You can see their little names, and they're always around. They're always hanging around, protecting Osiris. He's green because of his associations with the earth. He's not the only one. Several deities who have close associations with the earth are often shown as green. Presumably, we think because of fertility, something like that, but they didn't leave us a guide to how to depict the gods, so we are kind of guessing.
So where is
This papyrus. So I should also say that this papyrus is about this tall and very long. It's in the British Museum. This one. There's a painting of this one in Ezekiel though on the wall. Is it this part of it or a different part of it? It's one part of this same papyrus. And it's painted on a wall in Ezekiel, in the slave lodge, right, where the collection of Egyptian antiquities are. You all know about the collection of Egyptian antiquities in the slave lodge? Yeah. There's a collection of Egyptian antiquities in the slave lodge. But we all know where the slave lodge is. Yes, okay. So if you go into the slave lodge, normally they direct you to go left and you kind of go around and then up and it's very circuitous. If you go in, go right and up, then you'll see it right away, the display for the Egyptian antiquities. Yeah.
How are these artifacts allowed to leave Egypt? Like this in the British Museum, or that in Ezekiel?
Yes, the Ezekiel one is just what some art students painted. It's not.
It's not the real one.
No, not this. There are actual
This
real
is the real one
artifacts.
in the British Museum.
Oh yeah. This is complicated, but before Egypt was an independent country, it was part of the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman governors did not have any problem with letting Europeans take whatever they wanted to, for the most part. And that continued for a lot of the 20th century, and then it evolved, right? Because then you had agreements between foreign archaeological expeditions and the Egyptian government, and then there'd be kind of an agreement where the Egyptian government would say, well, we keep half, you can have half, we'll decide which half that is. And then they would get some, but now it's nothing. Nothing exits Egypt. It's actually a little bit of a problem, not so much for the artifacts, but in Egypt they won't even let samples leave, so you can't even take like soil samples out of the country, you can't take anything out of the country, pottery or anything, and that's problematic because Egypt doesn't have some of the equipment and expertise needed to do things like C14 dating. So if you read in the news that like, oh, they've done some new carbon dating on some mummies, or they did this, that's almost always on collections overseas. And that's all the kind of data we have there. Hopefully in the future, Egypt will open up, either create labs that have the right technological, scientific expertise, or they'll allow for more export, at least of samples, so we can do
I think that's had it by now, considering how rich it is in.
They're very protective, and it's the lifeblood of Egypt's economy is tourism, right? I think manufacturing a bit too, but tourism, and they're quite protective of all their artifacts, and they're still trying to get certain ones back from the British Museum. So they want the Rosetta Stone back. They just want the really spectacular ones. They want the Rosetta Stone back. They want the bust of Nefertiti back from Berlin. But don't worry, the stuff we have in the slave lodge, it's not significant enough for them to come calling for. It's everyday stuff that they have tons of. So.
I didn't know what this what's that word slith? Slith, what's that word?
Slave Lodge.
What is that?
The Slave Lodge. It's
The
a
Slave
museum in Cape Town.
Okay.
Yeah, it's downtown. It's the old
Okay.
what is it? It's the old courthouse, right?
Yeah, it's at the bottom of the Government Avenue.
It's right next to Parliament, right? And right next to the company's gardens.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's now a museum to slavery. That's why it was a slave lodge, right? And then it became a government building. And so now it's a museum to slavery, but the Egyptian antiquities are still there because there's no other place for them. That's why. We'll see. So, let's see. Right. This was just another example about the significance of this myth for the afterlife. Another spell from the Book of the Dead. Again, it's like a series of ways for the Egyptians to reconcile death, right? What is death? Why does that not exist? I put this fragment up here though because it makes reference to the end, right? I haven't really talked about it, the end of the world. But what happens in the end, at least for the Egyptians, is that in theory, Atum is going to come along and destroy everything he made and go back to just being the primordial waters, right? So creation is a process of differentiation. Eventually, it's all going to come back together again. And so we're told that that when you die, you're going to live in the duat, in the underworld, until that time when everything becomes one again. And just to give a couple of more examples of artistic representations of, because I mean, so much of the iconography of ancient Egypt has to do with death. Why? Because that's what survives. That's what survives in the deserts. And so that's what we have. So Anubis as protector of the body. And notice that he's in the shape of some kind of canine or dog, right? What dwells in the deserts? Jackals. So what better way to protect a dead body against scavengers, jackals, hyenas, if they had them, I'm not sure, than to have a god also in the form of some sort of canine as well.
And the bird?
The bird, which bird is this? It's got a head. Oh no, that's the spirit. Sorry, that's a manifestation, I think it is Ba, one of the spirits. It takes the form of a bird because it flies from your body and enters the duat. Yeah. Okay, so Osiris has his face. He is now king of the underworld. Isis is pregnant, and she gives birth to Horus. And we get into the kind of second part of all these stories, and I see that I'm rapidly running out of time, so I'm going to have to speed it up. And there's a series of texts and stories that are all about the struggles of Isis in raising Horus, because he is constantly under threat from Seth. And he's portrayed as this helpless child at the mercy of all the dangers of the world. And the dangers they manifest in such things as scorpion stings, as hunger, as fever, as all these things. And of course they mirror actual threats in the real world. So in the real world, the sick and the weak are often identified with the Horus child. So much like that story we looked at yesterday, a lot of these stories are actually spells, and they're about dealing with sickness and health issues. And this becomes one of Isis's primary identities as this mother who is going to go to any odds to protect her son. But I wanted just to show you this briefly, just as an example that Horus as a child becomes his own kind of god himself. He's almost a separate deity from Horus the adult. And he's, in the mythological stories, he's weak and vulnerable, but of course he overcomes the adversities. And so Horus the child develops as his own type of god who becomes then an almost apotropaic figure, a protective figure, a deity that can ward off danger. That's what apotropaic means. And so we get lots of images of him in art where he is the master over the harsh forces of the world. So here he is standing on a crocodile, holding a lion by its tail and holding, I think it's a scorpion. Weird looking scorpion though. There, overcoming this. So he becomes a symbol that people use as a talisman, if you will, for protection. But let's move to Horus the adult. Now, Horus, like Osiris, like all of these gods, had a separate tradition. He predates the mythological cycle we're talking about. He's extremely, extremely old. Horus, the hawk starts appearing as a sign of kingship even before we have proper texts. The symbol of Horus is used with the first kings of Egypt. So he's associated with kingship early on. He's portrayed as a celestial hawk, a lord of the sky. And because of that, then at times he gets assimilated with Ra, right? So I introduced you to the version of Ra, Harakti. I said Ra for two horizons. What I left out was the Hor part, that's the Horus. So you've got Ra, Horus, Akti is two horizons.
What's it up his head?
It's the double crown of Egypt. Yeah, it's one of many crowns. It's a crown a king often wears too. And yeah, he has it in both of them. He wears it a lot, as does the king. He can be shown as both a man with a hawk head or sometimes just a hawk. But again, so much like Osiris then, at some time in the Old Kingdom, Horus gets co-opted into this mythological cycle and becomes a son of Osiris. And in the role of his son as being a son of Osiris and Isis, he has to overcome his uncle Seth in order to get his throne, in order to succeed his father. So, that takes us then to Seth, who I haven't talked about much yet, except in passing. What about Seth? Why is he such a bully? Well, Seth, again, is another very old god who's originally associated with the dangerous aspects of the desert. Flash floods, sandstorms, desert animals. And in the mythological stories and references and religious texts, he takes on very many different forms. Bulls, pigs, crocodiles, panthers, all to take on destructive acts. He's also frequently shown as lustful and irreligious. He will bring down sacred trees, he'll hunt sacred animals, he breaks sexual taboos. In some of the literary tales in the New Kingdom, he's making lots of inappropriate, both heterosexual and homosexual advances on people. He's often a god of anger and violence, of rebellion and strife. And in art, he's represented by an imaginary animal that's somewhat canine-looking, but not entirely. But it is imaginary. I think meant to be a little sinister-looking, but maybe to us looks a little comical. I don't know. But for all of the negative stuff about him, it turns out that Seth is actually the patron god of the Ramesside dynasty. So that god, Seti I, that is his name, right? Seth is in his name, and this is the name of Seti I, and here is Seth in it. And it's maybe not surprising because the Ramesside kings, especially early on, are quite aggressive and very keen on foreign conquest. And so that is probably perhaps why they want to associate themselves with kind of Seth's more destructive, aggressive nature. Because there is a flip side, right? So Seth behaves badly, but his talents, his qualities can be harnessed to achieve desirable outcomes. He's very strong. He's represented as the most physically strong of all the gods. He's quite clever, and he can be very protective. He's a lord of certain metals. He's associated with iron, the hardest metal that was known to the Egyptians. And the gods need this strength at times because the gods are continually having to battle against the forces of chaos. So even though he seems to be instigating discord and chaos and can be an agent of chaos, he can also help the other gods fight chaos. And we see that, especially in the New Kingdom, in traditions about how when after the sun sets and it has to go through all the different hours of night and fight all the dangers there, Seth is with the sun god. And here's a depiction from one of these underworld books, one of these underworld tales. There's the sun god. I know he's got a hawk head, but the sun disc on his head, that's the clue that you're talking about, the sun god. He's in the middle, there's Seth. Seth is slaying this serpent called Apophis. And the serpent was kind of the embodiment of all chaos, the archenemy of Ra. And so, it seems Seth was the one most suited to defeating Apophis. And so every night he does this on behalf of Ra, helps him to slay this serpent. What does it all mean? These contradictory aspects. And I think what we're seeing in here is the Egyptian ambivalent attitude towards raw physical power, towards military power. They recognize that you need raw physical power to achieve certain ends, to defend, to protect, to survive. But they also recognize the destructive force of such power as well, especially socially, right? The destructive result of such power on society. And this is something that many societies deal with, right? This balance between might and the dangers that it brings, such as conquest, mutiny, coups, right? The fears of militaries gone amok and turning on their civilian populaces, that kind of thing. This seems to be similar for the Egyptians. But that aside, in the mythological tale then, what we have then is this conflict between Horus and Seth. Horus comes of age and challenges Seth for the throne of Egypt. He goes before the council of the gods and say, the throne lawfully belongs to me. I'm the son of Osiris. This isn't fair. I should be the king. Seth objects. And basically Seth's argument is that he's the strongest of the gods, so he should be the ruler, because he's best situated to protect Egypt. Horus says that no, he's legitimate by means of his birth. And so what we can see in this is reflection of real-world conflicts in Egypt, in which what happens more than once is that the son of a king is deemed too weak or too ineffectual to rule. And then someone else comes along, often elsewhere in the royal family or even amongst the elite, who wants to claim that role because they're stronger and better suited. So it's this argument in monarchy, right, of succession by right versus succession by ability. And again, many societies deal with this similar kind of problem. So in the telling of this conflict, there's a couple of different traditions that are coming together. And one is about familial antagonists, the split of a family, and bringing back that family together. In other words, a split of a country and unifying the country, which is a constant theme for Egypt. Another theme is the so-called Hamlet theme, vindication of a son over a wicked uncle, right? Avenging, the death of Osiris. I don't think we need to get too much into the various episodes, but it plays out. What happens is that the Council of God says, basically, can't you guys just sort this out between yourselves? We're not interested. Don't make us decide. And so they have all these, in certain tales, they have all these comical battles at times. And there's violence, there's trickery, there's cunning. Sometimes they're shown as equals, sometimes Horus is junior and needs Isis's help. There's a lot of variations. We don't have the time to get into them. There's violence in terms of the destruction of Horus's eye, which then symbolically gets restored by Isis and becomes a potent symbol of power in its own right in Egyptian iconography. Let's go ahead. Long story short, Horus triumphs. There's different versions though. Sometimes he triumphs by physically defeating Seth. So, sorry, I had this image. Here is Horus stabbing Seth as a weird-looking hippopotamus in the skull, with Isis kind of helping him right along. Other times, the gods just kind of rule that Horus is correct. There's different versions. Then, what happens after that really depends in different points of time what status Seth has as a national god. So in the New Kingdom, when Seth is quite favored by the kings and others, the whole realm is split between Seth and Horus, and then you see lots of images of them together, representing the two parts of Egypt come together unified with then the ruler of Egypt. So here you've got Ramses III, and you've got Horus and Seth right next to him. Here you've got the symbol of unity, and you've got Horus and Seth tying a lotus and a papyrus plant around them, representing the two halves of Egypt, the lotus and the papyrus. In other versions, especially later in the first millennium, Seth is not popular in the first millennium. In those versions, he just gets kicked out of Egypt altogether. But he's still kind of there in the beyond, helping out with stuff. The triumph of Horus is celebrated in in hymns, basically as the appropriate succession. He takes up the office of his father and so forth. And as you can imagine, this is enacted out when there's a new king, right? So when a new king comes to the throne, then you get a lot of performance of this myth to go along with that. Because the myth of Horus coming to take the position of his father, becomes basically the myth of kingship, right? The justification for the kingly succession. Horus's reign becomes a model for future reigns. He reigns for quite a long time, and then he is followed by a series of demigods, and eventually then the first kings. The Egyptians are a bit murky about these details, though. They weren't very concerned. They're more concerned about Horus. The first kings, not so much. But to sum up, I know I rushed through the end there a bit, I'm sorry. The Osiris Cycle is basically the final act in the broad narrative of the Heliopolitan cosmogony. It's bookended, right? It starts with the death of the father and ends with the coronation of the son. That's S-O-N. But maybe also S-U-N, depending on how you want to think about it. But it's more than that too. I mean, it's a story about the struggle and significance of world succession, but it's a story about life after death. It's a story about family conflict. It's a story about family relationships. And for that reason, it has a lot of relevance for not just the kingship, but of course, everyday Egyptians, because they can certainly relate to some of these themes, especially about the family conflict, I would guess. And then the creation myth saga as a whole, from the beginning of the cosmos through the reigns of the gods to Horus, it gives existential meaning to the lived reality of the Egyptians. It explains the cosmos and the world, why it exists the way it does, where the sun comes from, why the land is the way it is, why there's death, and so on. It explains the celestial bodies, the institution of kingship, and of course, above all, explains the existence of evil, and provides a roadmap a bit of how to try and avoid that through correct behavior. Now I know I went over time, but I just wanted to have a brief epilogue because it came up yesterday and I wanted to give a better answer than I gave, which was, when does this all end? When do people stop believing in these stories? We don't know exactly precisely, but this is what I can tell you. Basically, the belief in these sagas and these stories starts to die out with the rise of Christianity. And that starts in the 1st century AD, but it takes several centuries for it to happen. It becomes more popular, and then by the late 4th century and the early 5th century AD, you have a series of decrees by Roman emperors against pagan temples. And it's not just the ones in Egypt, it's all over. Calling for their eradication and destruction. Now that doesn't actually happen. I mean, but there's lots of defacement for sure. Especially by the monks in the rural parts of Egypt. They are very militant. And so there's a lot of defacement. I'll show you in a moment. But eventually, of course, then in the 7th century, you have Arab armies that take over Egypt and introduce Islam. It doesn't replace Christianity right away. Christianity actually continues for a long time. And even there's still, as someone mentioned, I think 2 days ago, there's still a strong Christian community in Egypt today that is descended from Christianity, 1,500, 1,800 years ago. But it further kind of diminishes than people who believe in the ancient cults. Now the problem is that we assume that the people who believed in ancient Egyptian gods continued well into this period when authorities were trying to eradicate it, but they have to hide, right? So they're not as clear in our sources. But we do get texts from the 5th century AD that talk about pilgrims still going to the temple of Isis in Philae, and things like that. But what does it mean for the survival of our material and where all our knowledge comes from? This is an example of kind of Christian iconoclasm that starts to happen. So they don't destroy the whole buildings. What they often do is they go in and they destroy parts of the human figures. The faces, the parts that are exposed, basically. The faces, the arms, the feet. And if you look really closely in the hieroglyphs, you'll see that, not there, but up there, you'll see that every time there's like a bird, right, or a person, they've been chiseled out a bit also. I mean, it's not all the time. Presumably, I mean, this is really tedious, right? If anyone ever chiseled out stone? It's really tedious. But it definitely happens in certain places. But they didn't always do that. Sometimes they just painted over. right? So in the Temple of Amun-Ra at Karnak, what they did is they plastered over some of the reliefs and just painted images of Christian significance, saints, episodes from the Bible, and so on. So if you go to the Temple of Amun-Ra at Karnak today and ask your guide,